Imagine a village near a capital city of a European country. In several weeks, this village has been totally destroyed by the Russian troops. In its outskirts, you can barely find a house out of hundreds which is not either totally destroyed or severely damaged. 5 months after this happened, these houses are still in ruins. This village is called Moshchun. It is near Kyiv. We have visited it, talked to its inhabitants, and here are our stories. Hello and welcome to the podcast Explaining Ukraine by ukraineworld.org, a website in English about Ukraine. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I am chief editor of ukraineworld.org. My co-host is Tetyana Ogarkova, in charge of international outreach at Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Hello, Tanya.
Hello.
Ukraine World is brought to you by Internews Ukraine, one of the oldest and biggest Ukrainian media NGOs. Before we start, let me remind you that you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/UkraineWorld. We spend the majority of your support to help people affected by this war. So we visited this village, Moshchun. Let's tell our listeners this story.
Well, let's start maybe with the overall impression of this Moshchun. We visited many places around Kyiv, Bucha, Irpin, Borodyanka, but maybe we will not be mistaken if we say that Moshchun is the most destructed village near Kyiv. This is the exact place where Russian troops were stopped when they tried to reach Kyiv, and it was also a place of an intense battlefield during several weeks in March. Russian troops were trying to get access to Kyiv. They were stopped by Ukrainian troops, by Ukrainian army, but at the same time by territorial defense. And the village of Moshchun was taken by Russians, but then it was liberated by Ukrainians several times. So unfortunately, when you walk now in this village, what you see only ruins. You see maybe 90% of houses are destroyed. And we visited this village 5 months after the events. And unfortunately, we have to say that there is nothing done about these ruins. People are waiting for special commissions from Ukrainian state to fix the damage, and then maybe to restart the buildings of these houses. Unfortunately, we cannot say about Moshchun as we say even about Borodyanka or Bucha or Irpin. We cannot say that the life is still going on there, because there is almost no people. Some people are back. Most of them, they have no other place to stay. They live in ruins. They live for example, in one room of a completely destroyed building. And there is an urgency to rebuild this village.
Let's allocate it geographically. So Moshchun is near a city of Hostomel, and those who have followed the events in February and March surely know the city of Hostomel, because there is a military airport, Antonov Airport, through which Russians try to send their troops and use it as a placdarm to attack Kyiv. So Hostomel, Bucha, Irpin, this is a triangle of towns. But also near these towns there are villages. We visited Horenka. There are also lots of destruction there. Visited Moshchun, which is like 5 kilometers from Horenka. It is very close to Kyiv. So when we talk about the destruction, let us also specify that the most destroyed segment of Moshchun is on outskirts of the village itself, and this is a district of so-called dachas, where people were building. Many people there have the apartments in cities, like in Kyiv, and there during Soviet times they were building houses in a village house, right? Very often with their own hands. We know this story because your parents have this dacha, and we know that usually it takes like decades when a person brick after brick constructs this dacha, and then it destroyed in a matter of maybe several seconds, several minutes. But it is also true that because of such villages where there were heavy fights, Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, was really saved from the Russian invasion. These ruins are also testifying that about the heroism of Ukrainian defenders, the territorial defense, Ukrainian army, but also testifies how close we were actually from Russian entering Kyiv with big forces.
Yeah, and let's also situate it geographically, saying that there is no clear border between Kyiv and then Pushcha-Voditsa, it's an outskirt of Kyiv, and then without any border you enter Gorinka, and then almost without border you have like 5 kilometers from Gorinka another village to Moshchun, and then Moshchun Dachi, the mostly destructed part of Moshchun. So there is no clear distance, in fact. So it feels when you come from Kyiv and you arrive to Moshchun, you have an impression that you haven't left Kyiv, in fact. So it's extremely close. So in a way, you see this massive destruction as if it was inside Kyiv. And what we know from news, from media in the end of February, in the beginning of March, there were a lot of helicopters coming to Hostomel, and people in Moshchun were extremely afraid of these helicopters. There were dozens of them, dozens of helicopters coming there. A lot of fighting during the first day already of this war, but a lot of people were still staying in Moshchun, hoping that they will be in a way quite far from the battlefield. They thought that maybe Gostomel will be the objective, and they are a couple of kilometers to the east. They will not be touched. But when Russians were dismantled in Hostomel, because we know that this Russian operation had no success, Russian troops tried to enter, taking Kyiv, taking another road, this one which was going through Moshchun. And this is why they crossed the river Irpin, because let's explain that there is a river Irpin, like a town Irpin, which is close also to Moshchun. So Russian troops, they crossed the river and they arrived to Moshchun, which was already defended by territorial defense, but it was pretty weak for Russian troops. They had to come back to Gorinka and to Pushcha-Voditsa, and then Russians occupied these outskirts of Moshchun for several weeks, for a couple of weeks. And most of population of Moshchun Dachi and Moshchun village, they succeeded to flee the village, but some of them stayed in the occupation, and a lot of them, specifically elderly people, they were not killed by Russians, because we've had no similar stories to Bucha, but they were killed by shellings or by heart attacks and all these kind of events. And when Moshchun was liberated, there were unfortunately many civil bodies discovered by Ukrainian army, namely in the undergrounds where people were staying. For example, old people were staying. They were so afraid of this massive shelling that they just lost their lives during these shellings, even if they were not directly killed by Russians. This story took place in March. For 2 or 3 weeks, Moshchun was liberated together with Bucha and Irpin at approximately the same time, when the Russian troops decided to go away. And what was discovered in place in Moshchun at the moment where Russians left, Ukrainian army found a lot of Russian uniforms, military uniforms. It means that Russian soldiers were putting off their uniforms and they were putting on civil clothes in order to flee and to hide themselves somewhere in the forest. That is also explained that Moshchun is surrounded by forests, so they were trying to escape in panic, and that's it.
Yeah, and we still hear many stories from different regions. After 1 month of the battles, suddenly the locals discover Russian soldiers alive and who were hiding in forests.
Some Buryats.
Yes, and maybe these ones also were hiding somewhere. Maybe they are still in Ukraine. Maybe they try to escape in the civilian clothes and go back to Belarus. Actually, this attack was from Belarus, right? Mostly from
Yeah.
Belarus.
Maybe important detail, what people told us in Moshchun is the attitude of Russian soldiers towards their own people. When Moshchun was liberated, and we were lucky enough to talk to a witness, I mean, a guy who was in a territorial defense during March, and he told us, and when Ukrainians entered Moshchun, they found approximately 50 dead bodies of Russian soldiers, and they didn't care for their dead, so they were not buried, they were not they were in their places. And even more, there was one house in Moshchun where Russians organized a kind of a hospital for wounded, and in this so-called hospital, a Ukrainian army found a couple of bodies of wounded, which were quite explicitly killed at the very last moment, where Russians decided to retreat. So they killed their own wounded in order not to leave them there. They were incapable to take them away. So it is a story of extreme cruelty of Russian army, not only against Ukrainians, which is clear for us, but also towards their own soldiers.
Yeah, this is cruelty or indifference, maybe. Right, so you have your wounded soldiers. You need to retreat as far as possible, and you kill them. Okay, but you can just leave them for Ukrainian army. Ukrainian army would take care of them. There is an attitude that are, of course, different things are happening on the battlefield, but there is an instruction, of course, of very decent behavior with regard to Russian prisoners of war. Not only for humanitarian reasons, but also for practical reasons, because Ukrainians need to exchange them for Ukrainian prisoners of war. And we see that Russians don't care about this, so they really kill their own prisoners, their own soldiers, not to let them become prisoners of war. And as we told our listeners in our previous podcast, they also killed Ukrainian prisoners of war in Olenivka. So they don't care about these exchanges or whatever. Let's also talk about by the way, of course, we understand that this is an audio podcast, and we describe you these horrible scenes of destroyed houses. But we filmed them. We have made lots of videos. You can check them on Ukraine World Twitter. You can also check them on the French version of the Twitter of the Ukraine Crisis Media Center. And I'm actually thinking of making kind of a video for YouTube. So you can maybe a little bit later check out our YouTube channel of Ukraine World and see those destroyed houses. But still, you can see a lot of on our Twitter already. So the problem is right now. You mentioned these people from territorial defense. These are volunteers from the foundation which is called SPADOK, which means heritage, and we're traveling across Ukraine and trying to understand and trying to ask people what you need in terms of humanitarian aid, then collect it. To some villages we bring food, to other villages they're asking us for clothes. But it seems that what is increasingly needed is especially in villages like Horenko or Moshchun, this is reconstruction. And reconstruction is, of course, much more expensive process. And for example, this particular foundation, we will send. You can find a link in the description to this podcast. They decided to collect bit by bit money for reconstruction. They have already helped reconstruct some of the private buildings, one garage which helps also to repair cars, including for Ukrainian military. But of course it is work for years and years.
Yeah, for years. And there's different categories of people living in Moshchun. In Moshchun itself, in the village, people were living like in any other village. So this was a kind of primary house for them. And some of them were able to flee the country, or maybe to flee to some other western parts of the country, or maybe to their relatives, to their family. But some of them, we were very much impressed talking to several people who are still inside the village. It looks like you see completely destroyed house, which is situated on the front line. You see even the Russian tank close to that, and you see the position. This is the last house of the village, so Ukrainian positions from the very beginning were there, and it was a kind of a Russian artillery maybe coming to this house. It is completely destroyed, and then you see a man, and you ask him, what are you doing here? And he says, I'm living here. So he lives in the kind of and when we ask, where do you live exactly, this is all in ruins, he explained that there is one room inside the house which is he managed to repair in a way to be able to live there in summer. So you don't need heating, there is no water. Let us also explain that in Moshchun dachas there is no electricity because everything was destroyed, and now they have to repair the lines, but it costs a lot of money, and unfortunately, given that most of people left at that very moment, they will not be able to pay for that, for electricity. And other people who are still in village, they are unable to pay the whole sum. So this is something to be done. And there is no gas in most of houses because they had this gas line. But when the house is destroyed, it's logical that the gas line is also destroyed. So this man, for example, he's living in a kind of a small room inside a huge ruin of his house. He's cooking outside. He's having a kind of a gas balloon, and he's using that to cook. He gets water from his neighbors. He walks to get some water. And he's able to live there during the summer, but when winter comes, it will come soon because we are in August, so a couple of months it will be getting colder. He will need to invent something, how to live.
But hopefully this man you're talking about, he has an apartment in Kyiv. Unfortunately, we talked to another woman who doesn't have an apartment, and she was crying when she was talking to us. An elderly woman, I think somewhere between 70 and 60 years old. She also has a husband, also a gray hair old man. And he suffered from one of the shelling. So he became, as far as I understood, half deaf after this. And their house is completely destroyed. So they're living in the house of their neighbors who left for Germany. So this is also another story that our listeners have to understand. Maybe that if you meet a refugee from Ukraine, it is quite probable that if their apartment or house has not been destroyed, other people, their friends, their relatives, refugees, displaced people from the east or south might be living there. So while you are helping, like Germans, British, Poles, Czechs, Hungarians, I don't know, Italians, Spanish, when you are helping some Ukrainian refugees, quite probably that these refugees, by their real estate, are helping people who are staying here. But this woman was absolutely desperate because she does not have an apartment, and the house in which she's living of her neighbors is also damaged. It's not just intact house. It's in the same place. It's also damaged by shelling, but she's still capable of living there, and she has no idea whether she doesn't have money to rebuild her house.
She doesn't have kids to go.
She doesn't have children to. Her husband has children from the previous wife who died, I think, 12 years ago, and but they are living in a 2-room apartment, and there are many people. I think she told us about maybe 10 people or something that were living for a short period of time in these 2-room apartments, and she decided to come back to these ruins. So imagine a kind of outskirts of a village in which you have probably several hundreds of houses. None of these houses is actually intact. None, literally none. And we came across these houses maybe there are several hundreds here, right? I think, and we have met maybe 4 or 5 people, right? But still, maybe some of the house was already being rebuilt. So the people are doing something with the roof. But this is a very rare, actually, vision, because I think that it was the only house in which there were some reconstruction going on. And another man we have met, let's tell his story, that his house is almost intact. There was some minor damages, but near his house he had a garage, and in that garage he had underground. And in this underground, as all Ukrainians who have these village houses, because there is wet and the temperature through the summer is not high, so he was keeping his food, like some
vegetables, potatoes.
Yes, that's and when the war has started, this war, the second Russian-Ukrainian war, has started on 24th of February, he brought his children and the grandchildren to the village. And this is also a typical behavior and a typical mistake the Ukrainians have been making. They were fleeing from Kyiv to the countryside without understanding that this countryside might be the real battlefield. So they were hiding sometimes in the underground, but then there was a huge attack by Uragan or by Grad, we don't know, and the garage was completely destroyed up until this bunker, this underground, the basement, and hopefully everybody was in the house, not in the underground. So you can think about your safety, go to the underground, and then become a victim. You never know how to be safe, actually.
Yeah, that's it. But what is also impressive is that another story. We were filming a completely destroyed house, when you can see even the objects, they stayed in their place when the house was destructed. You see a stove, you see a table, you see some chairs, but there is no walls and no roof, and everything was in fire. And this kind of mess, and it impresses you, And
there are lots of houses in which walls did not survive, but there is a stove, the furnace inside. And why? Because the Ukrainian stoves in bricks, they're made with very thick walls.
Yeah, and then we see we are filming that for our videos. And we see a young woman approaching that place with 2 kids, and she enters that place. So we start to talk, and she explained us that they are the owner of this house, of these 2 houses, a family. So sister and brother, they were owners of these 2 damaged houses, in existing houses. And now she came to take care of her cucumbers, because there were vegetables planted. They planted vegetables around their ruins, and now they're taking care of these cucumbers and some other vegetables, and they're living somewhere far in Moshchun. Maybe there is another house of their family. And she explained us, and so our question was why it's still in the same situation as in March. Why don't you start doing something about that? And the explanation was that, first of all, but people don't have money. This is extremely expensive for any kind of Ukrainian family to reconstruct a house, because these houses were constructed during many generations. But first of all, you have to clean everything. So it means that you have to deconstruct all these ruins first, and then you have to restart the building. But to do that, you have to wait to have at least a kind of a hope for the help, for assistance from the state. You have to wait for an official commission which will fix the damages to your house, and it takes time because there are not a lot of people, and they have to fix everything, and then maybe just to be in a database. And later, we don't know exactly, maybe it's a question of years, when you reconstruct, you maybe have right to have some money, some financial aid from the state. So people are taking care of their ruins for them to be in the same state as they were in March, and they're taking care of their vegetables, of their flowers also around these ruins. And when you see that, it's a kind of surrealistic picture.
Surrealistic, but also very humane, very touching, because people are coming to these ruins to take care of the vegetables, to take care of the land. We have seen a similar story in Makariv, when there was a completely destroyed house of a piano teacher, and you can see the burned remains, the skeleton of this piano which was in the house, and there are beautiful flowers around it. And as we were told, this woman is coming here to take care of the flowers. We have seen it also in other villages when people are just taking care of the land. You mentioned this need to dismantle the ruins, and we've talked to this man, the story we've just told you, with the destroyed garage. For you to understand the strength of the explosions, imagine a huge, massive doors of this garage in steel, very thick metal iron doors, and they were just thrown by the explosion wave for a couple of meters to the another side of the road. And he is now dismantling the ruins, and he's very careful. We also filmed it. So he classified the bricks on, I think, 4 categories. There is a category of the bricks which are not damaged, which can be still reused. There is a category of bricks which is, I think, just split in half or by thirds, that you can maybe use in this or this way. And there is a category of bricks which is completely just little very small fragments. He takes these fragments and he goes to the road, which is not a paved road, which is a road in earth, the land road. And you can imagine when the rain comes down, it becomes very wet and very dirty. So he just leaves. He just puts these fragments of the bricks on the road to kind of make it useful. So they are trying to make the fragments, the ruins, useful for themselves and for other people.
Yeah, and let's explain also that man was something like 80 years old, maybe 75 years old, quite an old guy. And he was doing that methodically for many weeks already, we imagine, because it took a lot of time. It looks like it took a lot of time for him to
but there were
organize
volunteers who came and helped. This is also another story, that many volunteers are coming and helping.
Yeah, and let's emphasize this thing about reconstruction. That we met a foundation, volunteers from this Spadok Heritage Foundation. What they are trying to do exactly. So now they are trying to take care of people who really need to live in Moshchun because they have no other place to go, and what they are collecting money only for materials. I mean, only for bricks, and they are organizing things in place just to reconstruct quickly now. And they have already they already reconstructed one garage. And they started to reconstruction of 2 houses. So they take a family. They are sure that these people really need this house to be reconstructed, and they try to organize the most economical, the most quick way to build something before winter arrives. So, and what they need, these people, they need donations now. The nations are not, it's not expensive, in fact. So what they do, it's not temporary houses. What is important for them, they opted not to construct temporary houses like wagons, from metal, so you can use that for 1 year and that's all. They're trying to start to build one room, for example, 40 square meters on the ground to let people in, and then people can continue all by themselves, maybe next summer, starting from the next spring. But the idea is to build something for people who want to stay in Moshchun, who don't want to go away for winter, and so in a way to keep people in place.
I think we really have to think about some creative ways to solve this housing problem. One of the ways is, of course, as this foundation Spadok is doing, is just collecting donations from private persons. And as far as we understand, like to build this little place, material is needed for several $1,000s. This is not much. So you can see the link to the website of this charity in the description of this podcast. But I think that we should be thinking about some other ways. For example, some twinning programs with some towns or villages in Europe or United States or Australia. Imagine a municipality of a rich town somewhere which has a budget. I mean, $1 million. Well, it's not big, for example, but $1 million will help to rebuild, I think, several dozens at least houses in such towns. Yeah, I think several dozens. Why not? Houses in such village as Moshchun.
And what is extremely sad about Moshchun is the same as Bucha and Irpin. It is really beautiful place, beautiful place close to Kyiv, and people were enjoying life there. It's quite clear. You see beautiful nature, forest, river, a lot of flowers, and a lot of happy people. We can imagine that before the war. And when you see all these ruins, and you can imagine the despair of people who lost all their lives, all they had, in fact, in there, it's just extremely sad. And this place, you cannot just move away. You cannot just say, I will move somewhere, I will not be back, because it will be a pity if this place stays like a ruin. They need this reconstruction. They need this revival of the place. It is very beautiful. It has the potential, and we do hope that this will be possible in the future.
Another solution might be that there is a big number of multi-story buildings constructed or under construction before the 24th of February, and they are not finished. People are not living there. We don't know whether the apartments has been bought, has been purchased. So maybe these constructors need some investment to finalize these buildings and these apartments just to be redistributed among the people who lost their homes. So I think we should really, everybody should really think about this. And there is a lot of this humanitarian work, reconstruction work that should be done. This was a podcast explaining Ukraine by ukraineworld.org, a website in English about Ukraine. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I'm chief editor of Ukraine World. My co-host is Tetyana Ogarkova, who is in charge of international outreach at Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Ukraine World is brought to you by Internews Ukraine, one of the oldest and biggest Ukrainian media NGOs. You can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/UkraineWorld. We're spending the majority of your support to help people affected by this war. And by the way, we're thinking of also investing part of some your donations to this reconstruction projects as well. Of course, this is not big sums, so the people need much more money, but this might be one of our targets for the future. Follow our podcasts on wherever you listen to our podcast. Don't forget to like them, to tell about this podcast to other people, to advise them to your friends, to your colleagues. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, some other also networks. Listen to our podcast on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, SoundCloud. Stay with us and stand with Ukraine.